Ukraine and European allies are working on a revised peace proposal from the U.S. CNN's Melissa Bell takes a look at what's in the plan.
President Zelensky has been speaking in a little bit more detail about the revised peace plan that has now been handed back to the United States, a 28-point peace plan that has now been revised by the Ukrainians to have just 20 points. What he's been telling journalists is that this is a plan that has now been worked on by Europeans and Ukrainians and therefore represents, he says, a European vision for ending the war in Ukraine. Within those points, one detailing the Ukrainian position, which is that the idea of a demilitarized zone could function only for the Ukrainians along the contact line, not handing over the whole of the Donbass to the Russians as they had hoped for initially. There is also within the revised plan the idea that Ukraine would receive NATO-style Article 5 protections without actually joining NATO. In fact, any mention of it joining NATO has been removed, as has the language that might have barred the country from any hope of joining NATO at some point. There is the inclusion, also the idea that Ukraine might be able to join the European Union in 2027. So a number of points that Ukrainians have turned into the basis, they believe, of further negotiations that can now take place. We expect that over the course of the next few days, those talks will continue between Europeans, the United States, and Ukrainians. The big question on the minds of many European diplomats and leaders, officials as well, mainly, is what Russia will make of the changes to its initial 28-point plan and whether it is actually willing to negotiate. Melissa Bell, CNN, Paris.
Earlier, I spoke to John Luff, the head of foreign policy at the New Eurasian Strategy Center, a London-based think tank, and I asked him about whether Russia will budge on its demands for the Donbass region. Here he is.
It's very difficult to see how Russia's going to move on this issue. It seems to be a red line that Putin is determined to gain control of the Donbass region. And he's signaled that if he can't achieve this through a negotiation process, then he will simply fight for it. And it is true that the Russian army is advancing very, very slowly in this region. And the Ukrainians believe that it would probably take them several months at least to be able to conquer that territory. So Putin really has the choice here. Does he make some sort of compromise and effectively claims that territory, and President Trump is proposing to just turn it into a demilitarized zone, possibly into some sort of free economic zone. Nobody really has any real idea of what all this means. But it would effectively save Putin the effort of having to fight for it, while then being able to claim that the Ukrainians have effectively abandoned it.
Yeah, as we heard, I mean, that plan apparently includes security guarantees. They're supposed to be like NATO's Article 5, but not actual NATO membership. I mean, you've studied Russian behavior for decades. I mean, would Russia accept that? And would something like that actually deter Putin from coming back for more later?
Well, I think it depends very much on the nature of these guarantees. And I think we have to be careful with the word guarantee here, because what does it actually mean in practice? I mean, security guarantees always depend on the quality of your armed forces, first of all, then of your political relationships with allies, all these things. But quite understandably, the Ukrainians are saying, look, if we have to give up some territory, and effectively Zelensky is accepting that he's probably going to have to do that, even though he's claiming that he's going to have to put this to a national referendum, that in return from their allies, they do receive something reliable in the form of security assurances. But at the end of the day, I think it's going to be down to the Ukrainian armed forces to be Ukraine's ultimate security guarantee. And here, in fact, the assistance of Ukraine's allies is extraordinarily important, because it is going to require building up the Ukrainian army, making sure it's properly equipped, properly trained, and in a position to fight if it absolutely needs to. And that will then be an effective deterrent. And I think the Russians have learned one thing from this war, which is that their assumption that the Ukrainians simply wouldn't have the will to fight, which seemed to them to be the case in 2014 when they annexed Crimea. That's, on this occasion, proven to be completely wrong. The country has mobilized very effectively. It's kept the Russians at bay now for nearly 4 years, and the losses inflicted on the Russian side have been absolutely colossal.
The Ukrainians are proposing a demilitarized free economic zone in the Donbas region where U.S. businesses would be able to operate. Now, Russia has been trying to take control of that region completely for months.
This would be would mean real, solid, legally binding security guarantees for our country.
So it's not clear how Zelensky's plan is actually being received by the U.S., but with Ukraine refusing to accept the surrender of Donbas, the head of NATO is issuing a pretty dire warning.
We are Russia's next target. And we are already in harm's way. When I became NATO Secretary General last year, I warned that what is happening in Ukraine could happen to allied countries too. That we had to shift to a wartime mindset.
Joining me now is Ivo Dalder, the former U.S. ambassador to NATO. He joins us live from Brussels and NATO headquarters. Thanks so much for being with us.
Great to be here, Audie. Thanks for having me on.
So first, I want to talk about what we just heard, the wartime footing. Is this fear real, palpable, that you're feeling in that office? And if it is Europe really acting that way, right? Are they pushing as hard as they can?
So the fear is in parts of NATO headquarters and in part of the NATO countries. It's particularly strong, of course, in the countries that border Russia, the Baltic states, Poland, other states in Eastern Europe, and the Nordic countries. Indeed, the Nordic countries, Sweden, Finland, Norway, have prepared for many years for the possibility of a confrontation. It's one of the reasons why Finland and Sweden joined this alliance just a couple of years ago. And the Swedes have just issued a leaflet saying what to do in case of war. There is this sense that war is no longer a theoretical possibility. It's a very real possibility. So one of the things that they are doing is they're spending a lot more on defense, very significant amount. An agreement to spend up to 3.5% on real defense capabilities and another 1.5% on defense-related capabilities, 5% of GDP. It's a big deal. The biggest fear, though, is actually not from Russia. It's from the United States. And the question of whether the United States shares this view of Russia or not.
I want to talk about the money a little bit more because this free economic zone it looks kind of like an appeal to the Trump administration, whose peace plans often have something like this economic model built in. It's something that they used in the past. I think it was Serbia and Kosovo back all the way in 2020. Obviously, with Israel and Palestine, they talked about making like a resort area. And so what do you make of Ukraine basically trying to say, look what you could have? Do you think that's a winning move?
Well, it's clear that President Trump and his administration look at the world as a real estate set of real estate areas in which the resources that may be in the ground are critical. Remember that a few months ago, Ukraine actually signed an agreement with the United States about the exploration of critical minerals and natural resources if and when a ceasefire and a peace were to be settled. So I think what President Zelensky is trying to do is to say, we're the good guys. We're not the ones who are standing in the way of peace. It's the Russians who are standing in the way of peace, and putting on the table a plan that says this is what we would accept, including an economic incentive for the United States to buy into it. I don't think this will get us any closer to peace. Peace will require the Russians to agree to something that the Ukrainians and the Europeans can agree to, and for 4 years that hasn't been the case. This is more a public relations effort by the Ukrainians to demonstrate to the President of the United States that his statement that the problem is Zelensky not accepting the peace agreement, that's not correct. He's more than willing to accept a ceasefire and indeed perhaps open up economic opportunities for the United States.
So Ambassador Dalder, thank you so much for speaking with us.